In this video, I'm going to go over the foundations of what you need to know in order to use the Navy in Hearts of Iron 4. My focus is on single player against the AI. The Navy can sometimes be pretty overwhelming, so I want to help you be able to have fun with it and get results. So let's start by going over to the Navy map mode. You don't give orders directly to your ships, instead you give orders to task forces, which are fairly equivalent to divisions. So if we click on one of our task forces here, you can see all of these different ships which are grouped together, and they will move and act as one unit on the map. So each ship is pretty much equivalent to a battalion. The one difference being is you can move your ships between different task forces freely, unlike army division templates where you need to pay experience to change them. Task forces are grouped into fleets, which are equivalent to armies. And so you can see our different fleets down here, just like you can see your armies. And then if you click on them, you can see all of your task forces and you can select them from here. And you can assign admirals to your fleets, just like you can assign generals to your armies. However, there is no equivalent to field marshals for your Navy. You can't group different fleets together. You can use the different theaters if you'd like to organize your fleets a bit more. So you can click on this new theater button if you have a lot of different fleets and you want to split them up between your different theaters, just like you can with your ground armies. When you have a task force selected, you have all of these different buttons down here, which are your different naval missions. These work somewhat similarly to how your Air Force mission works. You basically tell them to go to a certain region and do a certain thing in that region. Unlike with your army, where you can manually control each division and exactly where it moves, you just give them a general region to go and do something in. So each task force can be assigned a single mission, and then your fleet determines where they will do that mission. So with your fleet, you can right-click to select sea zones that fleet will operate in. And then the task forces in that fleet will carry out their mission in those regions. So for example, if I want this fleet to do a patrol in this region, they will go and try and patrol these different sea zones. So before I talk about what these missions actually do, I'll break down what are the actual goals that you want to accomplish with your Navy. The most obvious one is to be able to do naval invasions. So to do that with some divisions selected, you can click this Naval Invasion Order button, and then that will highlight your available naval bases that you can launch your naval invasion from. Let's say we want to click here, and then you can select where you would like the naval invasion to go to. You can right click, and you can add extra tiles to the naval invasion. So if you want to attack several different tiles with one order, and once you're happy with your selection, you can hit enter. Then your divisions will go to that port and they will spend some time preparing the invasion. And the other thing you require is naval dominance in every single sea zone that this naval invasion arrow passes through. So in this example, we need naval dominance in the English Channel before we can launch this naval invasion into France. And the main way that you get naval dominance is by having your task forces out on this patrol mission. So we can assign our fleet to the English Channel, and then we can set our ships to patrol. Then our task forces will go into the English Channel, and they will start their patrol mission. And if we wait a bit for it to build up over time, we will get naval dominance over this zone. You need to have at least 66% of the naval dominance in a region in order for it to be considered in your control, and it needs to be in your control for you to launch a naval invasion through that zone. Each sea zone has a minimum amount of naval dominance that you need to control it, and then otherwise it's just relative to the amount of naval dominance your enemies have. So the two main ways of winning naval dominance is by increasing your amount of naval dominance in a region, or by reducing the enemy amount of naval dominance in the region. So now that our naval invasion is planned and we have dominance in this sea zone, if we click this button, it will launch the naval invasion. However, we're not at war with France, so this won't actually do anything just yet. Let me declare war on them. And now if I click this button, this order will commence, and then our divisions will go and attack these tiles that we selected. There we go. We've landed our troops in France, and now you can attack as you normally would. If they actually had divisions on these tiles, we would have to fight them before these troops would be able to land. There's a lot of penalties for amphibious attacks, so for example, don't send tanks to do naval invasions unless they're specifically designed for it. Normal infantry should work fine, or you can use specifically designed marine templates. In this case, it was just across the English Channel. But if I go ahead and want to attack from here all the way to, I don't know, Brazil or something, then we would need naval dominance in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different sea zones, anywhere that this line passes through. So I generally recommend launching your naval invasion from a base that is close to where you want to attack. The other important thing to consider with naval invasions is supply. If you want to send supplies over water, you need a naval base on either end of the two land masses. So in our supply map mode, we have supplies going out to this naval base, going across the English Channel, and into this naval base in France. So the most important thing is to make sure you're able to capture a naval base. This will allow you to supply your troops and send in reinforcements. You're limited in the number of divisions you can actually send on a naval invasion. If you go to the Officer Corps tab, you can see what your limits are under the Navy command. So there's two different limits, the number of divisions per order and the number of orders that you can have simultaneously. So right now with some of the research unlocked, we can have 15 divisions in a single order, and we can have 9 simultaneous naval invasions planning. So really important tech to research is this transport line, because this allows you to do more naval invasions and plan them faster. To move your divisions over water to territory you control, you need to send them from a naval base to a naval base. Otherwise, the order won't go through. So right now, these divisions are on a naval base. If I click this, they will go through the water to that naval base. If you create some kind of order, like a front line or a fallback line or something like that, they will automatically find the nearest naval base, and they'll figure that out for you. It also won't let you click the order if your troops are not currently on a naval base. So you first need to issue a move order to one of your naval bases, and then you can shift click to queue up going overseas to that naval base. So if you fail to capture a port, your divisions will have no supply, you won't be able to reinforce them, and they won't be able to retreat. So they'll effectively be encircled, and you can really easily lose your divisions. This is why the main thing you're going to be fighting for with naval invasions is naval bases. You could also build a new naval base if you really need to, but you're unlikely to be able to build it in time before your divisions are destroyed. So typically speaking, you want your naval invasion to attack a naval base and maybe some of the tiles adjacent to it so that you can have reinforcements for your attack. Inversely, this is why it's so important to protect your naval bases. If the enemy can capture one, then they can send in reinforcements and supply their troops, and it becomes much harder to dislodge them. So it's generally a good idea to make sure that you have divisions protecting your naval bases. A convenient way of doing this is with the area defense order. You can click on this, you can select guard naval bases, then select any of these states that you'd like them to guard the naval bases in. The nice thing with the area defense order is that your divisions will automatically try to capture any enemy provinces within the states that you've selected. However, because they will automatically attack enemy tiles in the states you've assigned, I generally recommend you avoid this anywhere where you have an actual front line with the enemy. One other thing for defending your ports, you can use your divisions, have them actually protect your ports directly, or if you can prevent your enemy from getting naval dominance, they can't launch their naval invasion orders. So if you want to free up those divisions to be used elsewhere, you can use your navy to protect your coastlines. So that's the very basics of what you need to know to be able to launch a naval invasion. But there's also a lot of other things to consider. For example, fuel consumption. This patrol mission is very fuel intensive. So if you send like your entire navy out onto patrol, you will absolutely burn through your fuel reserves. You can see we only have 13 days of fuel to maintain this. And running out of fuel is really bad. Your ships get massive penalties when they don't have enough fuel. And of course, you also need fuel for your air force and your armies. That's where this strike force mission comes into play. This is a more fuel efficient method of getting naval dominance. Instead of every single ship constantly being out in the water on patrol non-stop, strike force, your fleets will stay in the naval base, waiting until they know where to go, and then they will go out and attack that thing and come back. Patrol missions are additive. They directly add the naval dominance score of all of the ships on the mission to your dominance in the region. Strike force, however, is multiplicative. So obviously, if you have no ships out on patrol, strike force does nothing. 0 times anything is, of course, 0. So you do need some fleets out on patrol to get naval dominance. The other reason for patrol is to spot enemy ships. And if they find something depending on their settings, they will attack it or they will run away. So when you have a fleet or a task force selected, you have these different settings here that you can use to determine what your ships will do when they find an enemy. There's the aggressiveness, which will determine the risk at which they will start a naval battle. These are pretty straightforward. Will they always attack? Will they always run away? Or at what level of risk do you want them to attack at? The other option you have is the naval targeting options. So if you click down here in the missions, you can select which types of ships that you would like them to attack. The reason that this can be useful is, for example, what if you have a task force that is dedicated to hunting down submarines? You don't really want them fighting carriers necessarily. So you could disable everything but submarines. Now, this task force will only fight submarines. Otherwise, they will run away if there is anything else. In Strike Force, the fleet will stay back at a naval base and it will wait until you actually find something to go attack. And then once you've found an enemy, the fleet will go out of the naval base to where they spotted the enemy and attack them. So if you're limited on fuel, you can have one smaller task force out on patrol, and then you can have a larger task force with all of your big ships on Strike Force. And they will multiply the naval dominance of that patrol task force. So for example, maybe this really big fleet that has a carrier and lots of different battleships in it, we could put this on Strike Force, and then maybe we put something like this smaller fleet on actual patrol. So we can see in this tooltip, by hovering over this icon, we're getting 325% extra naval dominance from this fleet that's on Strike Force. And then our patrol task force is giving us 1,773 naval dominance. So in total, over time, we're going to build up to 7,847 naval dominance, while using way less fuel in the process. You can see we're starting to spot someone, and over time we're going to build up progress on spotting this enemy. Now that we have spotted their fleet, we have begun a battle. So let's talk about this window very quickly. Up here at the top is all of your surface ships, and then this blue section down here is for your submarines. And then there's different rows to this combat. So up front is the screens, then in the middle is your capital ships, and then in the back is your carriers. And then also convoys will be here as well. So screening is important for protecting against torpedoes. If you have 100% screening, then enemy torpedoes cannot hit any of the stuff back here. So it's a good idea to make sure you have enough of these lighter screening ships to protect your capital ships. Then you want to protect your carriers with your other capital ships. The other advantage of screening is you get this bonus to naval hit chance and fleet retreat speed. Each capital ship requires 3 screens in order to be considered fully protected, and then each carrier requires 1 capital ship. However, the general recommendation is to have 4 screens for every 1 capital ship, in case you lose something or your screening efficiency gets decreased. And we have finished the battle. We've managed to sink 4 different destroyers, and we've taken a little bit of damage in this battle. You can tell by any of these Repair Now buttons. This orange bar is the strength of your ship. If this hits 0, this will destroy your ship and it will sink. And so if your ships are damaged, you need to send them to go get repairs. Obviously, these ships right now they barely have any damage at all. It's not that big of a deal. But let's go ahead and tell them to repair anyways. And then once they're queued up for repairs, in your production tab, you can see the naval repair queue. And there's 2 different limits for repairs. Every single ship uses a single dockyard while it is being repaired. So you need to have enough dockyards available to repair your ships. This is probably the most important thing to remember to do. Make sure that you have enough dockyards available to repair your ships. I like just maxing this out as much as possible. If you just had 1 dockyard here or something like that, all of your ships are going to go one at a time in an order trying to repair. And for example, your bigger ships like your battleships and carriers and stuff can take months to repair. And if they're going in a sequence, that can take years. And the other limit is that each level of naval base can repair 1 ship at a time. You notice we have 19 dockyards that are being used for repairs, but only 3 ships are actually being repaired right now instead of all 5. That is because this is a level 3 naval base, so we can only repair 3 ships at a time. This is important to consider if you're like in the Pacific and all of your ships go to one of these different naval bases that just have a level of 1. They're just going to be sitting there waiting for that naval base for a long time. Learning about this button right here completely changed my enjoyment of the Navy. This will help you keep your ships from being sunk and also will prevent you from just having your ships endlessly waiting for repairs. So if you click on this Repair Now button for your entire task force, the whole task force will go for repairs. Even if you only have like this 1 destroyer has just a tiny bit of damage. If you have this automatic split off button enabled, the ships that are damaged will go back to repair, but the rest of your ships will stay out on their mission. So it can be important to consider this if you want to maintain continuous control over a region. You don't want the paint job of one of your destroyers getting nicked and the whole fleet stops everything they're doing to go and repair the paint job, you know? The reason you might not want to do this is your destroyer going back home to base unprotected might get sunk while it's unsupported by the rest of its task force. So sometimes, even if you're not able to actually sink the enemy ships, by engaging them in a battle, you might be able to damage their ships, force them to go back to port, and that might give you the opportunity you need to secure naval dominance and launch that naval invasion. Because you only need enough naval dominance for just a split second to send out the divisions, and if you lose it while they're already en route, they will continue to go to their destination. The next most important concept to cover with the Navy is convoys. So anything that ships over the water uses these convoys, and you can see these different routes that are going across the world, and these convoy routes can be attacked. So every one of these routes has a route efficiency, and that is the percent at which that route actually does whatever it's trying to do. So if we have one of these supply routes that has 50% efficiency, we're only going to get 50% of the supplies arriving at their destination. So these white routes are for supply. If these routes get cut off, then you will lose supply overseas, which is very bad. For example, one thing that you can do is use these buttons to determine the access to the sea zones. For example, I want to say never go to these 3 sea zones. All of these routes will be cut. This is very bad because obviously you get massive penalties from not having enough supply. Look at the supply in Egypt. So here is without, here is with. So the blue routes are for resources. Light blue is imports, and dark blue is from your controlled territories. There's a lot of aluminum here in British Guyana. If this route efficiency were to drop to 50%, we'd only be getting 50% of this aluminum available for us to use. This is obviously very bad. You want these resources to be able to, build stuff like airplanes. Or if you want to do imports over oceans, like say we want this oil. If this route gets cut off, then we're not going to get the oil we're paying for. And the green routes are exports. And basically how this works is the importer takes the cost of any convoy raiding that happens. So the exporter gets paid in full. If it doesn't make it, it doesn't make it. You still pay for it though. So it's on the importer to actually protect their purchases. So actually, if you look here, France is attacking some of our convoys. They're using these submarines. And this icon right here, this little eyeball with the X over it, means these submarines are undetected. We don't actually know where they are. A submarine that's undetected cannot be attacked. So submarines are quite effective because they use their stealth to be very hard to deal damage to. So they're a very good choice for convoy raiding. They can go in, they can sink some different convoys, and then they can get out. And they're also very cheap. So there's several different ways of protecting your convoy routes. The first is to use patrol in any regions you're being convoy raided in, and then those ships will try and hunt and destroy any convoy raiders they can find. The other option is convoy escorts. Basically how this mission works is that when a battle begins against your convoy routes, for example this, your fleet will automatically join the battle to defend your convoys. If you're able to get the screening efficiency to 100% in front of your convoys, the submarines will not be able to deal any damage to your convoys. So we can help you protect your convoys as they try and get away. And then hopefully you can also sink their submarines in the process if you can find them in time. And then the inverse of convoy escort is convoy raiding. And your fleets will go into this zone and try and attack enemy convoys that are passing through it. You can only actually attack convoy routes if there is a convoy route through there. If you right click on a country and then you go to the intel ledger, if you have enough intelligence on their navy, you can see their convoy routes. So for example, if we do our convoy raiding right here, we could deal a lot of damage. So now some of our submarines have attacked their convoys and they're going to try and sink these convoys. And by convoy raiding, you lower the route efficiency of any convoys headed through that region. So the big advantage of this is you can try and prevent your enemy from getting resources or supplies overseas. So for example, if you're like fighting in North Africa and maybe you're struggling to actually push forwards, if you convoy raid around all of their naval bases, they can't get supply to their armies, they get big penalties, allowing you to push easier. Inversely, you want to stop the enemies from doing the same thing to you. And the final thing that convoy raiding does is any armies that are out at sea can be directly sunk. So if your armies have this little icon, that means they're actually out at sea. And as long as they are out at sea, they can be attacked by enemy convoy raiders. Whether that's while on a naval invasion or just moving to one of your other naval bases. And if they get attacked, their strength will be reduced and you lose all of that equipment and manpower. So it's really dangerous to send your divisions over water unprotected. And inversely, you can try and sink the enemy divisions, which can deal a lot of damage to them. And this can be a great way of trying to defend against naval invasions. Try and sink as many of their armies before they actually hit your land, and then they arrive super weak without any equipment, without any supplies, and then you're able to encircle and destroy their divisions. I'm not going to talk about mine laying or mine sweeping. I never use these. They're not really that big of a deal. Don't worry about them. So then there is naval invasion support. This mission will escort your naval invasions so that you can prevent them from being caught out while they're in the water and sunk by convoy raiders. Whenever your navy is adjacent to a coastal tile, they give a naval bombardment penalty to any of the enemy divisions there. So when you have your navy on naval invasion support, they will protect your army, and then they will wait next to your army, giving them that bonus, or giving the enemy that penalty. So if I attack here, for example, if I look at the enemies, they're getting a 3% penalty because of shore bombardment. So it reduces both their attack and their defense. You can manually move your task forces to sea zones using Control H, and they'll just sit there. So you can do this even if you're not doing a naval invasion. If you're just attacking along a coastline and you have a navy to send out there, you can get that bonus. The other reason you might want to manually move your fleet around is to block straits. Any of these dotted red lines that you can send your armies over, if you put a task force in the sea tile that the strait crosses over, enemy armies will not be able to cross over the strait. So let's go ahead and move our fleet to right here, and then tag over to Denmark. You'll notice we can't actually move our army across to here because the straits are blocked by enemy fleet. Sometimes the AI will do this to you, so if this ever happens and you really want to cross one of these straits, you can put one of your fleets out on patrol and try to find that fleet that is sitting on the strait in that region. If you, of course, win the battle, then you can cross the strait. That's another small mechanic to be aware of. And the final mission I'll talk about is naval exercises. This basically is the main way that you can get naval experience while you're at peace. This works just like army exercises, pretty much. I would recommend, if you have the fuel for it and you're not going to be at war anytime soon, if your fuel says full, any excess fuel disappears. You might as well get some naval experience, so you can use that naval experience to get doctrines or to create ship designs. The other thing to consider with convoy routes is you can use these different restricted zones to reroute your convoys around very dangerous regions. So for example, we have a lot of convoy routes going through the Mediterranean, but maybe we can't effectively protect this, and we just don't want our routes to go through the Mediterranean. We can hit this X mark, and they will reroute, if they can, somewhere else. So red is a complete ban. Nothing will ever pass through this region, and yellow just means they will avoid it unless there is no other route. The nice thing with yellow is like only your supply routes that absolutely need to go through that region, like say to supply Malta, will go through here, but otherwise everything else will find a different route. And the AI can do this as well. So if you're convoy raiding and you're not sinking anything, maybe the AI changed the routes of its convoys. So when you're deciding where to convoy raid, it can be useful to find a good choke point, so they have no choice but to send their routes through that region, and you can reduce the number of regions you need to cover. The other thing that's important for convoy routes is you need convoys to actually go on those routes. If you run out of convoys, then your routes will lose route efficiency. So you want to make sure you have enough convoys in reserve. One other thing to consider is naval terrain. The first is ocean. This basically has no particular penalties or bonuses. Technically, there's this less chance to hit a naval mine, but that really doesn't matter. The next is shallow seas, which gives a massive penalty to the visibility of submarines, and this also slightly reduces positioning as well. So in particular, avoid sending submarines to any shallow seas. If you're trying to convoy raid the UK, this is why it's a really bad idea to raid in the North Sea and the English Channel. Your submarines will get spotted really easily and then sunk. It's far better to operate further out into the Atlantic. Then there's deep oceans. They give you a penalty to your destroyers and light cruisers, and they make submarines harder to see. The penalties to destroyers and light cruisers probably aren't going to be that big of a deal. You'll still want to keep them with your fleets for that screening bonus. And then the final type is fjords and archipelagos. This reduces the visibility of all of your ships, but of course the one that visibility is the most important for is submarines. So generally speaking, both deep oceans and fjords and archipelagos are the best place to put your submarines. and oceans are fine as well, but definitely avoid shallow seas. And then all of your really big capital ships get big penalties in fjords and archipelagos. However, generally speaking, I don't think these penalties are going to make a huge difference because they're applying to both sides of any battle. I wouldn't particularly worry about these too much. The big one that you're really going to feel is the visibility penalty or bonus to submarines. Every fleet has a home base, which is what determines its range and also where it gets its supplies from. So you can control right-click to change the home base. These red lines means it's out of range. So for example, if I want to operate here and this side of the Atlantic, I can right-click this naval base and now my fleet can operate in any of these zones. If you would like to have this selection be automatic, you can click this button, and then when you set your orders, it will automatically update the naval base depending on the regions that you've selected. If you hover over the name of the task force, you can get information on the maximum range, maximum speed, sub-detection, surface detection. Range is the average. So the speed of your task force is the lowest speed of any ship in it. So make sure you try not to mix slow ships with fast ships, or else you're losing the bonus of having the fast ships. And your fleets consume supply from their home naval base. If you have an absolutely massive task force with like 300 battleships, and then you try and assign them to a level 1 naval base, you're going to not have enough supplies for them. So you want to make sure you have enough naval base levels and you're assigning your big fleets to a big naval base. You'll notice this thing completely ran out of supply because the fleet is trying to take the supplies from here, which will then give you a penalty for your fleets and any armies in the region. Or your Air Force. Your Air Force also takes supplies too. I think it's easy to forget that your Navy and your Air Force actually use supplies as well, not just your armies. If you know you're about to be operating in a region, make sure you increase the level of your naval bases. Another really effective tool to use against enemy navies is your Air Force. If you build airplanes with the Naval Strike mission, so either if you add torpedoes or if you add bomb locks, you can set your airplanes out on naval strike missions into a sea zone. They're very good at sinking submarines because submarines typically don't have any anti-air. So the other thing is with your submarines, maybe don't send it to a region that is close to an enemy airbase. The English Channel is like a terrible place to put submarines because it has the shallow sea, so it gives plus 100% visibility, and the UK will usually have naval bombers here. So there's 5 different hull types. There's destroyers, cruisers, heavy ships, carriers, and submarines. Cruisers are divided into light cruisers and heavy cruisers. Heavy ships are divided into battleships and battle cruisers. Also with your special research facilities, you can get a few other different types. I won't really talk much about these. The main one that I would say is cruiser submarines are very good. They have less visibility than regular submarines. And then fleet submarines are an upgrade to that. So if you're leaning into submarines, I highly recommend you go for fleet submarines. And then underway replenishment is nice if you're lacking naval range. For example, if you're really trying to get across the Pacific. So let's talk about the different ship types. I'll start with submarines because they're pretty straightforward. Their primary role is convoy raiding. I personally don't usually like to use any of the tier 1 or tier 2 submarines. I wait until at least tier 3 or I build the cruiser submarines. These tier 1 and 2s are very easy to spot and they often get destroyed quite quickly and they don't have very good range. If you start with some of these, I usually just outright delete them, and I will also cancel any of these early submarines from my production queues. And for submarine designs, the most important stat is sub-visibility. You want this as low as possible. The harder they are to see, the harder they are to hit. So there's 2 types of screening ships. There's light cruisers and destroyers. The main difference is destroyers are cheaper, but they have worse stats. Light cruisers are more expensive, but they have better stats. Probably the most important difference between them is their range. This destroyer has only 1,800 versus the light cruiser's 3,000. So light cruisers are particularly good for places like the Pacific where you need lots of range. Cruisers can be good spotting ships for being out on patrol, getting you that naval dominance score. The cruiser hull is unique in that depending on what is in this slot right here determines whether it is a heavy cruiser or a light cruiser. If you use the heavy cruiser battery, it becomes a heavy cruiser. And then if you use anything else like the light cruiser battery or the rapid fire guns, then it becomes a light cruiser. You can tell by this little diamond icon here, this will be counted as a capital ship. If it has the X, it means it will be a screen. And then you have the heavy ship hull. And the thing that determines whether it's a battleship or a battle cruiser is the armor slot right here. It's pretty straightforward. Battle cruisers are cheaper, faster, but they have less armor. Battleships are slower and more expensive, but they have more armor. And then the final one is carriers. I recommend adding as many hangar slots as you possibly can, and I'd recommend not putting armor on your carriers. So any task force that has a carrier in it has this little airplane icon. If you click that, it opens up the carrier airbase. So you can add carrier airplanes to your fleet. If you have a task force with a carrier in it and it's parked in a sea tile, you can use these carrier airplanes like you can the rest of your air force, set up missions for them or whatever. So that can be a way of getting a little bit of air support for your naval invasions if you want. The main reason you want to build carriers is to be able to bring airplanes into your naval battles. The difference between carrier airplanes and regular naval bombers, carrier airplanes join the battle immediately, so they start dealing damage right away, whereas regular airplanes need some time before they're actually able to join the battle. However, the big thing with carriers is that if they don't have any airplanes on them, they're effectively useless. So make sure that you're also building carrier airplanes for your carriers if you're going to use them. As you're producing your carrier, you can click this button here to set the default composition of air wings that it will start with. So it'll take the airplanes from your stockpile and automatically fill them up. If you click this button here, this opens up an overview of all of your task forces. The main thing this tab is really nice for is this lost ships button, which gives you an overview of all of the ships you've sunk and lost. So this can be pretty nice to see how your Navy's been doing. What kinds of ships have you been losing a lot of? So let's talk about how to actually build your task forces. The first thing I like to do at the start of the game is group all of my ships into one giant task force just so I can see everything that I have and then organize it further from there. Let's start by splitting off all of the submarines. You don't really want to mix submarines with other ships because submarines are really slow and they'll slow down the rest of your task force. If you look at these, they only have 13 kilonauts, really slow. And then you have something like this destroyer with 32. So more than halving the speed of your destroyer by putting a submarine with it. You can change the icon of the task force by clicking this button and then selecting a new icon. I really like this button or the shortcut D so that you can really quickly split your fleet into smaller groups. If you don't want to have to micromanage the individual compositions of your task forces, which can particularly be quite annoying for ships that you're constantly losing, things like submarines and destroyers that are really cheap but constantly getting sunk. You don't want a fleet to run out of destroyers and no longer have any screening, and then all of your big capital ships are really vulnerable to torpedoes. What you can do is Task Force Composition Editor, and you can choose what you want the fleet to aim for, and then it will automatically reinforce from your reserves. So say, for example, I can say, I want this fleet to have 10 submarines at all times. Hit OK. And then you'll see here, we have 10 submarines out of 10 submarines. And if you have this automatic reinforcement button here, you can turn it on and off. So if you have some ships down here in this bottom part of this tab, this is your reserves. And these ships will automatically go and reinforce anything that needs reinforcements. So if I say want 11 submarines instead of 10, if I wait a bit, that submarine from these reserves automatically joins this task force. So what you can do is from your production queue, you can say build this submarine, whatever. You can say build an unlimited amount. And then there's this button right here where you can tell it where you want it to deploy. You could say just add it to this theater and they'll automatically join the reserves of this theater. So then once this is done, automatically this submarine join this reserve thing. And then if any of your task forces need new submarines, it'll go join those. You can save off these presets between playthroughs. I can go ahead and click save, and then you can load this so you don't have to keep customizing it. If you have a particular composition that you like, you can use this tool, save it between playthroughs. And then the other thing that you can do to help organize your fleets is every ship in the designer, you have these different icons that you can select for your ships. They don't do anything on their own, they're just for organizational purposes. For example, maybe you've built a destroyer that's specifically built for spotting enemy ships. Maybe you add this binoculars tag to it. And then in the composition editor, you could say, I want destroyers that are specifically have that spotter tag, and it will only use designs that have that tag on it. So if you have several different iterations of the same class of ship, you can use that to further organize different roles. So this is a very handy tool, and as I'm making this video, I'm realizing that I should be using it more because I never actually use this, and it's actually pretty cool. And it's one of those things that teaching is such a great way of learning new things. So that's everything I wanted to talk about for this Navy guide. My goal is to help you build that foundational understanding of how these different mechanics work so that you're able to more intuitively make decisions about what you want to do with your Navy, rather than giving you just a specific strategy to follow. I'm not going to go over specific ship designs because it's not that important. In my experience against the AI, just go with whatever feels intuitive to you and it most likely will work. The most important thing is to make sure your logistics are good. Make sure you have enough fuel and supplies for your fleets. Make sure your ships are getting repaired and back out into the water quickly, and that you're replacing any losses that you take of particularly your smaller screening ships so that your capitals are not left undefended and easy targets. If you can manage all of that, maybe your battleship design is not optimal, but it should work fine enough. So I wish you the best of luck in all of your naval battles to come, and with that, goodbye.